My father didn't raise his voice. That was what made it harder to forget. He walked across the room with the steady, deliberate pace of a man who had never once questioned his right to take up space, and he stopped close enough that I could see the careful way he had combed his white hair to one side, the same way he had worn it my entire childhood, and he said, in a voice low enough that no one around us could hear, "I want you to understand something. Amy was the one who added your name to the guest list. That was her choice, and I respect it because Sean is happy. But this family managed just fine without you for 17 years. Don't mistake being included for being wanted." The string quartet near the windows shifted into a new piece. Someone at the far table burst out laughing at something. The Cartwright Club smelled of cedars and orchids and the particular kind of quiet money that doesn't need to announce itself. I took a slow sip of sparkling water and let the silence sit between us. What my father didn't know, what almost no one in that room knew, was that a man named Hank Morrison was seated 3 tables behind him, and in less than 20 minutes, he was going to stand up and say something that would unravel every assumption my father had built about the last 17 years. The Cartwright Club sat on the edge of Richmond's west side, the kind of venue that had hosted 4 decades of anniversary parties and retirement dinners for families like mine. Families that believed in keeping up appearances and considered a well-set table evidence of good character. The main room held 60 people comfortably, white linen, low centerpieces so people could see each other across the tables, a quartet near the windows playing the kind of music that filled silence without demanding attention. My parents' 40th anniversary. My mother wore the pearl earrings from her wedding day. I could see them from across the room, small and cream-colored, catching the light each time she turned her head to laugh at something a cousin said. She hadn't looked in my direction since I arrived, though she'd smiled when we hugged. The brief, careful smile of a woman who had learned to love people across distances she didn't create and didn't know how to close. My brother Sean had given me a handshake at the door. Firm. A little too brief. We had not spoken more than twice in the past year, and each conversation had the quality of 2 people carefully avoiding the thing they most needed to say. His wife Amy had pulled me into a genuine hug immediately after, which told me everything I needed to know about who had fought to put my name on that invitation. Their daughter Lily had looked up at me from behind her mother's arm with enormous brown eyes, assessed me for approximately 4 seconds and said, "You're taller than in the picture." I told her the picture was from a long time ago. She said, "I know. You look happier now, though." Then she turned back to the dessert table with the focused pragmatism of a 12-year-old who had said the important thing and moved on. I had flown into Richmond that morning, checked into a hotel 12 minutes away, rented a car. I had learned long ago not to make assumptions about where you're welcome until you know for certain. Now I stood near the bar after my father walked away, water glass in hand, and I thought about what he'd said. The way it was calibrated to land without any witnesses. The careful reasonableness of the delivery. I'm not trying to be unkind, while saying something entirely unkind. He was a precise man, my father. He always had been. He trimmed the hedges with a level. He kept receipts for purchases made 20 years ago. He had a gift for making the cruelest things sound like simple statements of fact. Across the room, a man I didn't recognize caught my eye briefly from the 3rd table. Heavyset, probably 70, silver hair, the easy posture of someone who had known my father a long time and was comfortable in any room he entered. He was talking to the woman beside him, laughing at something, reaching over to refill her water glass without being asked. A small gesture. The kind you only do for people you've been paying attention to for years. I didn't know his name yet. I didn't know the chair beside him was for his wife, who had stepped out to call their daughter, who had called to check on her own daughter. A 9-year-old girl who had walked out of Massachusetts General 8 months ago with a scar below her collarbone and a complete, functioning heart. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I was 24 the first time my father asked me to choose. He didn't use those words, of course. What he said was, "Boston is not necessary." We were in the kitchen. Green tile countertops that my mother had always meant to replace. The clock on the wall that ran 4 minutes fast. Coffee warming on the burner that no one was drinking. I had just told him I had matched to the trauma surgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the best programs in the country. The program I had been working toward since my 2nd year of undergrad, when I first understood what I wanted, and understood, also, that wanting it would cost me something. He set down his coffee cup, looked at me for a long moment. "MCV is 15 minutes from this house," he said. I know, but this is where I matched. You could appeal the placement. That's not how it works. He turned to look out the window at the backyard. The same yard where Sean and I had built forts out of pallets, where my mother grew tomatoes in clay pots, where my father had taught me to throw a baseball on Saturday mornings, with a patience he reserved for things he considered worth learning. I had loved those mornings, I still did, in the way you love things that are gone. You've been pulling toward that city for years, he said. Like something up there has what you need that we don't. It's not about what you have or don't have, it's where the work is. Your work is your work, he said. Your family is your family. Those aren't the same weight and you're treating them like they are. My mother stood near the sink with the careful neutrality she had perfected over the years. The look of a woman who disagreed and had decided not to say so, which was its own kind of answer. I leave in June, I said. His jaw tightened, not much. If you go to Boston, he said, and his voice had dropped to the register I had only heard him use once before, the night his own father died, I need you to understand that we don't pretend things are fine when they aren't. Don't call home expecting everything to be the way it was. I waited for something else, some opening, some softening at the end of the sentence that would give me somewhere to go. It didn't come. So I went upstairs and sat on my bed with the acceptance letter in my hands, and I made the only decision I was ever going to make. And I left. My brother Sean called 2 weeks after I arrived. He was honest in the way Sean had always been, not unkind, just direct. He's not going to call, Sean said. You know how he is. I knew. My father didn't come around. He decided, and then the life around him rearranged itself to make the decision feel permanent. By September, I had stopped checking my phone for his name. By the following spring, I had understood something quiet and final. Some doors don't reopen because the person on the other side has already redone the room. I called my mother twice in the first year, short conversations. She asked about the weather, about the apartment, about whether I was eating enough. She never asked me to come home. I never asked why. The third time I called, no one answered. I did not call again. Residency consumed everything else. That is the honest truth of it. You don't have the bandwidth to grieve the life you left, when the life in front of you demands every hour you have and several you don't. The hospital became its own world, exhausting, complicated, completely focused on the immediate. I learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and vending machine coffee. I learned to make a decision in under a minute and carry the weight of it afterward. I learned that the human body is simultaneously more fragile and more stubborn than anyone tells you, until you've seen both in the same shift. I was good at it, not immediately. The first year I made mistakes that woke me at 3 a.m. for months. But I showed up anyway, I learned, I corrected. By the end of residency, my attending, a man with no gift for warmth and a precise gift for accuracy, had told me after a difficult case, "You have good instincts and you don't panic under pressure. That combination is rarer than the degree." I filed that away and kept working. Fellowship, staff position, associate attending at 34. The kind of career that grows because you grow inside it. An apartment in Cambridge with a view of the Charles River. Friends who understood what it meant when I cancelled plans because they cancelled theirs for the same reasons. Colleagues I trusted. Patients who sometimes, in the middle of everything terrible, looked at me with a gratitude that reminded me exactly why I had made the choice I made. My father lived in the background of those years the way unresolved things do, not loudly, but always present. I thought of him sometimes when I saw an older man in a waiting room holding himself rigidly together, certain that showing fear was the same as losing. I thought of him when I delivered good news to families who had been waiting for it, watching relief undo people who had been holding very still for a very long time. I wondered sometimes if he ever heard about my work. I didn't know. I never called to find out. The accident happened on a Thursday evening in March. I was already at the hospital when the alert came through. 17 vehicles on I-95 northbound past the Braintree split, mass casualty. We had 6 trauma bays, and within 40 minutes everyone was full, and the hallway outside was filling behind them, and we were triaging in real time, making the kind of decisions that don't allow for second guessing while you're making them. The girl arrived at 9:47, 9 years old. She had been in a school bus clipped by a jackknifed 18-wheeler, tension pneumothorax, air accumulating in the chest cavity, compressing the heart, collapsing the lung. She had minutes, maybe less. Both operating rooms were occupied. My resident looked at me, 19 months into his training, Smart, good hands, waiting for someone to tell him what to do in a situation the textbooks had covered but reality had not yet. I told him to clear the corridor and get me a chest tube kit. 11 minutes, fluorescent lighting, the organized, focused chaos of people who know their jobs, 2 nurses, an anesthesiologist who didn't ask questions and just did what needed doing. Somewhere down the hall, a family was waiting, and they didn't understand what they were seeing through the glass, and I couldn't explain it to them yet, because I was busy keeping their person alive. She stabilized, we moved her the moment an OR cleared. She was in recovery before midnight. The story appeared in the Globe 3 days later. A resident had taken a photo without my knowledge, blurred and mostly showing the back of my head and the controlled chaos around the gurney, and it had found its way to a reporter who found his way to my chief of surgery. The hospital put out a statement. My chief called me in and told me, with the discomfort of someone who needed to do 2 opposite things at once, that it was extraordinary work, and also that we were reviewing our protocol on on-site photography. The girl's name was Emma Morrison. Her grandfather was Henry Morrison, everyone called him Hank. I had not known his name when I operated on his granddaughter in a hospital corridor on a Thursday night. I did not know it now, standing near the windows of the Cartwright Club in Richmond, watching him push back his chair and stand up. He tapped his champagne glass once with a spoon. The room turned toward him the way rooms do, gradually, then all at once. Hank Morrison had the voice of a man who had spent a lifetime in rooms like this one, not loud, just grounded. He smiled at my parents and began the way toasts always begin, with gratitude, with warmth, with a reference to 40 years that made my mother cover her mouth with one hand. I held my water glass and waited for it to be over. But then he paused. He looked down at his glass for a moment, turning it slightly, and when he looked up again his expression had changed. "I want to say something off script," he said, "if Gilbert and Norma will indulge me." My father nodded from across the room. About 8 months ago, my granddaughter Emma was in a very bad accident. Most of you know this. A current of warmth and relief moved through the room. The particular warmth of a room that had been worried and has been permitted to stop. She is completely fine now, running. Being 9 years old with everything that involves. A few people smiled, someone laughed softly. But in the 40 minutes right after the accident, Hank continued, she almost wasn't. There was a surgeon on call that night who made a decision that most people, I've been told since, would not have made. She performed chest surgery in a hospital corridor because that was where Emma was, and that was when Emma needed it. And she did not wait for better conditions, because there weren't any. The room had gone quiet. I've been looking for a way to thank that surgeon for 8 months, he said. Her name was in the newspaper. I have the article. But I could never. There's privacy protocol, and I understood that. He stopped, cleared his throat once. I wanted to say it somewhere out loud. That there are people who show up when everything is at its worst, and they make the call and they bring someone back. And I do not know what I would be walking into in this room tonight without. Silence. He turned. He wasn't looking at the room anymore. He was looking at me. Something was working its way across his face. The expression of a man assembling a connection that should have been made sooner and had just suddenly locked into place. He reached into his jacket pocket without taking his eyes off me. He had a folded piece of paper. A page from a newspaper, I realized. He had been carrying it for 8 months. The surgeon's name, he said slowly, was Dr. M. Dyer, out of Mass General, Maeve Dyer. He said my name in a room that contained my father. I did not move, I did not need to. Hank Morrison had built in 40 seconds the bridge that 17 years of silence had not. He set the newspaper page on the table. He looked at me with an expression I will carry for the rest of my life. A man seeing the shape of something enormous that had been invisible to him until this exact moment. Then he nodded. Once, deliberate, like a statement. I would like everyone to raise a glass, he said, to the woman who brought my Emma home. The room was slower to move than a crowd in a story usually is. These were 60 people who mostly knew each other. At a party they had all thought they understood. But the glasses went up, one by one, and then all at once. My mother's hand was pressed to her mouth. Amy, 3 tables over, was already crying with the particular openness of someone who has just found out something they didn't know they had been waiting for. My father had not moved. He stood near the center of the room with his arms at his sides and was looking at me with an expression I had never once seen on his face. Not pride, not yet, maybe not ever. Something that comes before pride. the expression of a man who has just discovered that the story he has been telling himself for 17 years was missing an entire chapter, and the chapter changes everything. Hank crossed the room. He took my hand with both of his. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "How did I not know who you were?" "There was no reason for you to." "You're Gilbert's daughter." "Yes." He shook his head once. Then he glanced toward my father, and something passed between the two of them. The silent communication of men who have known each other for 30 years, and my father looked away first. He came to me 20 minutes later. The toast had dissolved back into conversation, the room had found its way to motion again, and I was standing near the windows watching the parking lot lights and the dark shapes of the trees beyond them. I heard him before I saw him, the particular rhythm of his footsteps which I had known since I was old enough to listen for them. He stopped beside me. For a moment neither of us spoke. "Trauma surgery," he said finally. "Yes." "In Boston." "Yes." He looked out at the trees. Outside, a car pulled out of the parking lot, headlights sweeping briefly across the dark. "Hank told me there was an article," he said. "I don't read the Globe." "I know." "I might have if I'd known to look." He paused. "I didn't know where to look." "I know that too." He turned his head slightly. "You could have called." I looked at him. "You told me not to." I didn't say it to wound him. It was simply the truest sentence available. And I had learned in 17 years of emergency medicine that the truest sentence is usually the most useful one. He exhaled slowly, the sound of something held for a very long time finally put down. "That girl," he said, "Emma. She's a good kid." Hank showed me a picture of her, last spring, after she was home. He was quiet for a moment. She was wearing a red sweater, standing in the front yard. I didn't say anything. "You saved her," he said. "I did my job." He turned to look at me directly, and I saw something in his face I hadn't expected. Not defeat, but a kind of exhausted clarity, the look of a man who has run out of the energy required to be completely certain about everything. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said. "I came for Lily." He nodded. He understood exactly what that meant. He didn't try to redirect it or soften it, and that was the most honest exchange we'd managed since I was 24 years old, standing in a kitchen with green tile countertops and my whole life in a letter I was holding with both hands. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment, the broad, careful hands I had known my entire life, hands that had fixed things and built things and held a baseball for me on Saturday mornings a very long time ago. I thought about the clock that ran 4 minutes fast, the coffee no one was drinking, the door that didn't open after I drove away. I shook his hand. His grip was firm, not as strong as I remembered. "Good night, Dad," I said. I found Lily near the dessert table before I left. She was methodical about it, the way 12-year-olds are about things that matter to them. She looked up when I appeared beside her. "Are you leaving?" she asked. "In a few minutes." She considered this. "Will you come back, like at some point?" "I don't know," I said, because that was the honest answer and she had earned an honest answer. She thought about it, then she nodded, apparently satisfied by the truth of it, which was more than most adults would have been. "I still have the picture," she said, "of you and my dad. I'd like to see it sometime." She smiled, open, easy, completely uncalculated, and then turned back to the dessert table with the focused energy of a person who had said what she needed to say and had other priorities. Outside, the November air was cold and clean. I stood in the parking lot for a moment and looked up at the sky, dark now except for a handful of stars visible between the clouds. Behind me, inside, I could hear the muffled sound of conversation and music continuing without me. 60 people who would go home tonight with a story they hadn't expected. I was 41 years old. I had driven away from my father's house at 24 with 2 suitcases, and a certainty that had sometimes felt like strength and sometimes felt like stubbornness, and was probably, honestly, both. I had built a life in the years between that morning and this one. A real life, full of work that mattered, and people I trusted, and the particular satisfaction of showing up for strangers, at the worst moments of their lives, and giving them back something they thought they were losing. My father had not apologized tonight. He was not built for that kind of thing and I had not come expecting it. What he had given me was a handshake and the absence of the cruelty he'd arrived with, which was not nothing. It was not everything, But it was the most honest version of him I'd seen in a very long time. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't undo the hurt, but it changes the shape of it, makes it lighter to carry, makes it possible, finally, to set it down somewhere and walk away without it. I got into the rental car and drove toward the hotel with the window open a few inches, the cold air moving through the car, and I thought about Emma Morrison in a red sweater standing in a front yard. I thought about Lily writing a letter in careful looping handwriting, asking for something she had no reason to expect and every right to want. Some doors stay closed. Not all of them should have been opened. But some doors close because someone decided they should, and the person on the other side spends years believing they deserved it. They didn't. You didn't. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, life walks you back to the threshold, not to undo what happened, just to show you clearly and without ceremony exactly who you became after you walked away. And sometimes that is more than enough.